Welcome to the Notes to My Legal Self, AI Insights, where law and AI collide. Get ready to level up your legal game with us. We've got career advice, cutting-edge developments, mind-blowing legal tech, and more. Know someone making waves in the legal AI world? Nominate them, or even nominate yourself. We love courageous souls. And don't forget, we want to hear from you too. Ask questions, drop comments. Let's build a community of legal superheroes. But here's the deal. We're all about to have a blast. AI may be serious, but we're here to make it fun. So buckle up, get ready to power up, and let's embark on this exciting journey together. Now, let's introduce your fearless host, Olga Mack. Get ready to dive into the awesomeness of Notes to My Legal Self, AI Insights. Let's go.
Well, hello, everyone. Welcome to Notes to My Legal Self. And today, Kassi and I will continue our conversation about the AI Act from European Union. We had a conversation, which I thought was pretty good, about high-risk things that are mentioned in the Act. And today, we're going to focus on, I guess, mid-level risks. And we will talk a little bit more about what that means and examples of that, because those are really fuzzy things that will become super real in the next few years, decades, for years to come. How about that? For years to come. But before we start, instead of formal introductions, because presumably you've been with us before and know a little bit about us, we thought we would have quick questions as we normally have. Maybe share something that you may not find on LinkedIn or you have not heard us discuss before. So we'll start quickly with the rapid fire questions. And so, Kassi, are you ready?
Yeah, I'm ready.
All right. Coffee or tea? Coffee or tea?
Coffee. See, this is funny, though. I never liked tea or coffee, and I lived in New Zealand for a year back in 2001, and I felt like I had to drink something. So that's where I started drinking English breakfast. But then when you start working as an attorney, you really need coffee. So now I would say coffee.
That's funny.
How about you?
Coffee, I guess, with a caveat that I always drink decaf, which usually leads to a question, why even buzzer? And my answer,
you just had that.
It's a smell. It's a sensual experience, I suppose. I really don't need any more extra energy, if you know what I mean. I have plenty of that even after my exercise and everything. I'm just full of energy, just generally speaking. I did grow up in the tea culture. And if everyone is drinking tea, I will drink tea as well. So, but yeah, coffee, decaf for the sensual experience. Cats or dogs?
Dogs, as I'm petting one of my dogs right now. So yes, dogs. How about you? You have a cat, right? How's
I if you asked me that 3 months ago, I would have said dogs. I would not have even paused. But now I have a cat named Jason that other people in my family call Sage. And he's everything I ever wanted in the cat, I suppose. He's quite good. He gives me about 20 minutes I need to pat him and do whatever I want with him. And then he's like a real dude. He then gets up, makes a very assertive meow and leaves. And I think it really works for our relationship.
No, that's great.
All right. Beach or mountains?
Mountain.
Beach, definitely. I like mountains, but beach is good. All right. Final question. Favorite book?
Oh, wow. I'm going to say Lord of the Rings trilogy. Or Jane Austen Persuasion.
Why am I not surprised?
Yeah.
I feel like I should not have asked that question because I think we've mentioned that a couple of times. I do not have a favorite book. I do reread Alchemist a few times, especially in my lowest low, because it gives me insights and perspective. I wouldn't call it a favorite book. It's more like a therapist on the shelf, which I reread and underline and find deeper insights every time. I'm not a religious person, but this is as close as it would get for me to be a Bible. So I think that's where I am. But otherwise, I read quite a lot and generally enjoy the process and get something out of every book. and very few books I reread. Okay, let's talk about the AI Act.
Yes.
Because that is an interesting place. So the AI Act classifies AI applications based on their potential impact on safety and fundamental rights. So the mid-level risk applications are those that pose moderate risk, requiring specific transparency obligations, like chatbots, I guess, that folks should know that they are interacting, for example, with AI. We talked about high-risk applications in the past, which are sort of different, and the mid-level risks are defined in contrast to high-risk applications, which could significantly affect people's safety or rights. For example, such as AI used in healthcare diagnostics or law enforcement or something like that necessitates strict compliance and, I guess, conformity and to assessments. So that's how I read it. Do you have an alternative view of high or mid-level, or how do you wrap your head around it?
I mean, mid-level, I think, or minimal is in essence like the catch-all, right? If not these, if you're not in the unacceptable or the high, you're going to be in the minimal mid-level risk. And I think that's a challenging space to be in, right? Because you're going to have to look as this act rolls out and gets, regulations or decisions are being made or enacted on, you're going to have to see how that's getting interpreted. So I would agree with what you said. It just creates a bit of a question mark of how are things really going to start being categorized once we get to enforcement.
Yeah. I am. It's interesting. It's interesting that you use the word catch-all category. I really worry. I think in any regulation, especially as extensive as the EU AI Act, I feel like a lot of acronyms in one sentence. I'm really worried about lack of clarity.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that this framework of categorizing risk is supposed to address and clarify. And then we end up with a mid catch-all category. And I'm really worried about, I understand what is super high risk. It's basically if there is, imminent death or bodily harm. I mean, I think we're kind of clear on that. And then no risk. I mean, I think we're pretty clear on that too. But everything else is sort of in the middle. And I'm really worried about it. I mean, practically speaking, I think that's where all the action will be.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, it's where there's not clear delineation. People love black, white rules. It's the gray space that's always challenging. And, I think we saw examples of categories in our last conversation that we were like, what does that really mean? And if we had that for specific examples of categories, it's even more difficult once you get, if not in these, then it'll be in this category. And we talk about fear, uncertainty, doubt, FUD in the crypto world, but there's a little bit of that in AI, in that we don't really know how these are going to be regulated, how they're going to maybe further define some of these categories. So, and it is potentially very far reaching in AI systems that have been in use for a while. Again, this, of course, the EU AI Act did not start because of the launch of ChatGPT 3.5 in November 2022. They've been talking about it for some time. It really, I think, though, we're seeing that it did get finalized faster than any other. And just knowing that there are existing AI systems out there that are going to have to be regulated in a different way, that's a big challenge, I think, for legal departments, compliance departments. And, we've talked about this before, Olga. I think just wrapping your arms around what AI systems do I even have in place in my organization, I think is a great starting point, because we don't know exactly how things are going to be categorized or further defined.
Yeah, I worry about, I guess, for me specifically, having been in very large legal departments like Fortune 100 and, organizations that are, on the innovation side. In the large department where you have a lower risk tolerance and, you're going generally at a slower pace, partially because of the risk tolerance and partially because you are a bigger machinery, so to speak, and you have a compliance department, and usually the levels of risk are sort of on the over compliance category. At least that's, I think, where the trend is. So I think, for big companies, that's actually not going to have that big of an impact, because in my experience, they tend to be on over compliance over time. Whereas on the innovative, smaller plays that, moves much faster and doesn't have necessarily a compliance department, like you, the one and only lawyer, one of 5 lawyers, is it? You're the boss, the advisor, and the cop, and the executioner, all in one body. And there, every single person from CEO to, the front desk person who greets everyone. And so people know you by name. Heck, they even know your husband and your cat. They really feel like they know you. So you are much more likely to be challenged. You're much more likely to engage in this argument. It's like, no, Olga, this is not mid-level. This is no risk at all. How is it? Right? So I can see how this is really challenging in the innovative, smaller place, and how you would get a lot of pushback. Because, look, I've been in a situation where people pull out and they say, okay, let's, for fun of it, let me put it up for you. Let's read the statute together. There is nothing in the statute that says that this is so-and-so, right? And then you basically do a song and a dance of what's the word on the street. This is what you heard from legislative history. And by the way, you hired me because you believe in what I'm saying, so go get a second advice. But that really becomes uncomfortable in smaller, innovative organizations. And, every time as a lawyer, as a compliance professional, I think you have to do the calculus. Do I pick this battle? Is this important? Mm-hmm. How do I help them and help them not to shut down their business, or let alone end up in prison or something like that? And how do I not put all my political capital, or do I put all my political capital, because this actually matters? Because this is if they cross this line, they will not be at their kids' graduation, because they will be locked up for the next 10 years. Right. So for me, I think practically speaking is the cause of this unclear, ambiguous category. Let's talk about examples, because I think examples may be able to illustrate. When are you thinking about examples of mid-level risks? What are you thinking about?
I think AI systems that maybe you're using operationally that not engaging with consumers in a way, or a client base. I think, and I think that that especially in the context of generative AI, there are a lot of really great use cases for them in an operational setting. So that's one thing that pops up key in my head, but I tend to be more ops focused. So what about you? I know you've worked on product design, client facing things as well.
I was rereading yesterday, and I think what I got out of it is sort of this. Actually, it's interesting that you're ops focused. I think my reading of it is more consumer awareness focused. This is where regulators are basically saying, your average human that has, an 8th grade education should know what's up. Mm-hmm. So I'm thinking, AI-driven chatbots used for customer service, where transparency is key. Like, folks should know if they are talking to Olga the person, or Olga the chatbot. By the way, the chatbot version of me is not as exciting. Or, something like, I'm thinking recruitment tool, and to me, that's consistent with what we're seeing in the United States, various state level regulations. I think we're really worried about biases in recruitment, because those have significant impacts on demographics and groups of populations, and have economic impact and impact on governmental agencies that support folks that may not be employed. So it has a massive impact. So I think that's what I think are examples for me. So I'm thinking less operational, and to me, what we're seeing with FTC being empowered, I think it's really in the United States sort of designed to address that rich pregnant middle.
And I think the transparency is is a really important thing to focus on. And I think it's something that, to your point, mentioning FTC, who's having a tech summit as we speak right now. We should have maybe rescheduled this, but that's okay.
Are you having a FOMO? Are you saying that my company
No.
does not stand a chance when, the commissioners? I'm not taking it personal, but I have
it's okay. I'm not saying that at all. I am here, so that's the key thing.
My ego is not that fragile. You can say that, although you're not nearly as entertaining as the commissioners in the Washington.
No, I was just listening to it before we dialed in together, and they were talking about chiplets, and I'd never heard of chiplets before, and now I want to go get a cat and name it Chiplet. So,
what is a chiplet?
Chiplet is, I guess, is a smaller chip. So. To create, I guess it's something I need to dig into tonight in my homework. I found an article to read about it, but so there are a lot of opportunities with AI, generative AI. Well, we're already engaging with them in a lot of ways. We're already engaging with chatbots, like you say, and maybe we're dealing with the AI system, and maybe we're dealing with a human. So I think that sort of awareness, that transparency, that disclosure, which is very well aligned with a lot of FTC's oversight of, the consumer. A great example is influencers having to disclose if they have a PR deal. And that's something that is so hard to regulate and keep an eye on. And you see them really going after big people who are not in compliance with that. And I could see something, moving away from EU AI Act to the impact here in the US. That might be something that rolls out, here, where there's going to have to be, if you're using AI, generative AI in any way, will you maybe have to disclose that? If there's an AI influencer, that's a Gen AI influencer. There are people out there like that. I think that, it's going to really hit marketing departments, sales departments in a big way, I think. So it'll be interesting to see kind of the interplay of the EU AI Act and the FTC in particular, because they've been so incredibly active in commenting, responding, having contests related to generative AI.
No, I think that's where the collaboration will be. I agree with you. Interesting. You learned the word chiplet. Yesterday, I learned the word, actually a 2-word phrase, algorithmic disgorgement.
Yes, algorithmic disgorgement. I've heard of that as well. And I think that why don't you tell everybody what that is? Because it's absolutely fascinating.
I think, well, I don't think anyone really knows what it is. There's a paper, there is a paper written, so I'm gonna share what I would guess it means, which is not a precise statutorily driven definition, which I would have liked. I don't think it exists in nature, but I think the idea here is that if you use private information, especially things like biometric, an FTC or, I presume, another enforcement body or a court of competent jurisdiction can come in and instruct you to essentially give up that part of your code. And, that could have no effect, that could have catastrophic effect. That's how I understand this term. Of course, FTC has historically asked for monetary repayment, which is a form of traditional disgorgement, which sounds somewhat makes sense. We haven't seen too many equitable type of experiences like disgorgement of algorithm in the past, but I don't believe there's anything under the FTC statute that would prevent the FTC to agree during the negotiation to something like that. They certainly in the past have agreed to what the press release looks like and various other things. Don't ask me how I know those things. So I thought it was kind of an interesting term. And yesterday I had a deep conversation on this. I think it will be very much a developing area. And the second thing you mentioned was about, FTC collaborating with the EU. Are you expecting that collaboration will be kind of at a EU level or country members' respective organizations?
I'm not quite sure. I mean, and we're already starting to hear from different countries who are in the EU who are saying this is kind of like our flavor. This is how we're going to, interact with it in our own, jurisdiction. I don't really know. I mean, and I don't know if it's going to be a direct collaboration or just maybe an influence, like maybe seeing how that's being done over, how it's being regulated in EU, and maybe one country is really being very progressive about it in certain ways, and maybe that will kind of influence or color how they approach it. I'm not quite sure. I mean, I know you've worked with the FTC before in various many ways. I mean, what's your gut on how that interplay will work out?
In the past, it was at a member countries, but I'm not sure. I do think that the EU may be trending because AI is going to be such a costly thing to enforce.
Mhm.
So it may be more collaborative effort to pull resources, especially as we're experiencing sort of deep fakes and biometrics. And one of the conversations we had yesterday, I actually personally, I know we put it under the umbrella of private information, something like health, PII, essentially. I think your sovereignty over your body and autonomy, to me, is more akin to essentially a property right that cannot be transferred. That has a non-transferability clause unless you are incapacitated and you have special health directives to your people you trust. So I think there's going to be an entire body of law to acknowledge the essentially our autonomy as humans, and which of course brings the entire argument we've had in the abortion. I really do think that this is when this will kind of come to the head, because I think it's really hard to regulate biometrics without bringing that whole discussion back.
Right.
And I think this is going to be very controversial and will necessitate, properties, describing humans as property is obviously not the right way to describe humans, looking at it historically, and using privacy is insufficient. I think it will necessitate sort of a combination of the two and an entire body of law to regulate. And of course, in this country specifically, there is a political baggage related to abortion rights. So I do think it's going to be a political disaster.
You're probably right, unfortunately. And the challenging part is threat actors are just moving so quickly with things, talking about deep fakes. It's just the technology is moving so fast, and it'll be interesting to see how quickly the EU Act, I believe it's a 2-year rollout period, once it's fully enacted, and just seeing how quickly that regulation ends up being precipitated and what those actions are going to be, because things just move, again, they just move so quickly. But I also think that there's going to be a lot of innovation in the compliance space related to AI and EU AI Act, the conversation of AI disgorgement or algorithmic disgorgement, maybe, and I think some of the
You like that term, huh?
I do. The thought of, well, you're going to have to remove that reference of that person, that protected information, or that information from that LLM could require you to completely rebuild your LLM. But I think there's going to be innovation. And I read a paper, or skimmed it. I don't want to say I read it with a super, super keen eye, but there's even people innovating on unlearning LLMs. Like,
that's actually, so that's why the algorithm disgorgement could be such a drastic remedy, because like theoretically you think, okay, well, this little algorithm doesn't work, so let surgically extract this piece and put another one that works. That sounds great in theory, but I would like a technologist confirm that that is actually possible in any given situation, because in my experience, I have never, I think I actually had experience with asking a similar question, because there is a right to be forgotten in the EU. Mm-hmm. And, if you ever ask a technologist, okay, I have this dating app or whatever collects consumer information, and ask them, well, can this be destroyed? And it's interesting. It's a yes or no question, and I can tell you how many times I've gotten a yes or no answer to my question. The answer is almost never yes or no. This is kind of the question. It basically, evolves into what I would describe as a philosophical discussion. Olga, what does destroyed mean to you? I mean, that's very slowly, because, and then I get this sort of analogy like, Olga, you get this piece of paper and you crumple it and you scatter pieces all over the world. Is that destroyed enough for you? And then I asked a stupid question like, oh, so if I'm smart enough to collect all the pieces and I'm really good at putting it together, can I do it? Or is it impossible? Well, Olga, that depends on how smart you are and what kind of technology you have. So like, we are down to a rabbit hole about what it means to be destroyed and can you piece it back together? And in the end, after 25 minutes later, I am, as a lawyer, sitting there, not sure. Is a true distraction possible? And is human intelligence with help of machine can reconstruct the experience? And I don't know.
It's a lot more challenging than I think people can say. Even the right to be forgotten, the thought of knowing exactly where every instance of your information is in a huge corpus of data, it's not as easy as people think. So it's a lot of challenges, but
especially in generative AI, because it sort of folds into things and you get an output and it's actually not clear what was always an underlying corpus on which it was trained or used for this specific answer. Mm-hmm. So that's why, even though theoretically it's possible to do it surgically, I think practically speaking, this algorithmic disgorgement is probably a catastrophic event for most companies, given the state of technology. I believe, again, this comes from somebody who is not a technical person on the team, but I would expect it to be a very difficult question and borderline philosophical about the meaning of life and what it means to be destroyed.
Right. I mean, without a doubt, AI forces us to engage in existential crises, I think, every single day. But it makes me wonder if we're going to start seeing a focus on maybe LLMs or small LLMs. I've heard that, I think, used before, that are on more specific, more better curated data, just from a risk management standpoint. So, I don't know if that's
I think smaller LLMs are likely going to be a flavor du jour, and solving any given problem will probably require a bouquet of smaller LLMs to address it. And in a smaller LLM, I think you do have the ability to look at the entire set of data and really trace it and wrap your hands around it, especially if you don't have to go all the way to the beginning of time. So if you kind of have an artificial cutoff where you say, okay, well, 7 generations of data is enough for me to know about, there could be some impurities on generation 10, but I'm okay with that. I think that's part of it. I do think that there's a lot of innovation on sort of traceability of data and keeping track of it. We do have technology to actually keep track of data en masse, and so that you would be able to sort of segregate data with various permissions and maybe clean up PII and stuff like that. I think we're going to see a lot of innovation there as well. So I think that's probably where we're trending. But interesting, let's talk about enforceability. So in something that is so high risk, according to the EU AI Act definition, you have sort of this association with fairly extreme things, like it could be shut down, right? It's essentially the company could be taken over. The receivership type of experience you have in the United States would say something like insurance industry. But with mid-level risk, what do you think? What do you think that enforcement non-compliance? Are we talking about money? Are we talking about liberties, or the algorithmic disgorgement?
I do feel like that the disgorgement option is the nuclear option, and my guess is that's probably not going to be the mechanism they use for that mid or minimal risk. I think it. I know that I believe the full text of the EU AI Act was, I think, leaked this week, and I've not had a chance to read it, but it probably will be warnings. It probably will be, potentially be fines. So that would be my guess. And and especially I going back to the transparency, making sure there's a compliance of that transparency, making sure that you're properly disclosing that an AI system is being used if it falls in that category.
By the way, the whole leaking of the EU Act,
right?
I mean, what is it, like the hottest document now?
That was all that was in my LinkedIn feed. What was that, Tuesday? Or I can't even remember what day that was, but it was everywhere. So
yeah. No, I was like, speaking of the, I mean, this is and we are creating a FOMO and a FUD around
FOMO and FUD around regulations. You gotta love it. So
yeah, this is fascinating. I was watching my feed too, and there's sort of this very high highs and very low lows, and I'm like, well, we're talking about a piece of legislation that is probably poorly written because it's so political. I mean, it's like a big anticipation and then going to be a huge bummer. That's likely what's going to be happening. So it's interesting to see this cycle of FOMO and FUD here. All right, let's talk about, we're coming to the end. I want to talk about a few more things. How do you think that EU AI Act will evolve to address that middle category? Where do you think, what industries do you think it will focus on? What tools is going to use for enforcement? And this is a lot of questions that I want you to answer in 1 minute.
It may be something that affects a lot of consumers that, again, doesn't hit in any of those high risk categories that we talk about. I don't know what those would be off, again, like advertising, I think maybe, or low risk chat box, in an industry that's maybe not dealing with someone's health or anything like that. I could see it kind of falling in that being the area of focus. So, and I do think, again, like the transparency in the advertising or anything like that, communicating with consumers in a way that they may not realize they're being communicated with. It makes me wonder, even, people get robocalls and they're recorded. Is there going to have to be a disclosure? At least in the US, we get those kind of robocalls. Will there have to be a pre-disclosure that this is not a human you're talking to? This is
those are highly regulated, by the way, very highly regulated by both, I mean, definitely by states. So yeah, it will be interesting to see how those statutes evolve. I'm thinking about, the AI Act that could significantly shape the global AI market by setting very high standards for safety and ethics. And you can theoretically imagine essentially what I would describe as race to the top in AI development, where companies strive to meet the standards, fostering innovation and trust in AI technologies. And that, I guess, could be a positive thing, though it may have a really high cost in terms of compliance and slower innovation. I think it also could influence this global market dynamics as, non-EU companies, EU is a significant market for anything consumer or business, frankly. So it could also lead to alignments and misalignment. It could, there's sort of two ways to do it. One is to comply with the highest standard, which is at this time AI EU Act, or it could lead to bifurcation. Customers in EU have special requirements, and then everybody in the rest of the world do it differently. And I've certainly done both ways. So what do you think when you are thinking about how EU AI Act shapes global AI market and competition? What do you think the impact of that will be?
I think they're obviously the leader. I think that there's a lot of people paying attention to it, obviously, by what we're seeing in social media. Like it's just a very, very big area of focus, obviously. And I think that not the EU AI Act is, of course, getting a lot of attention, but I do think that, again, the FTC is not too far behind it. Like there's a lot of chatter, I think, because of the EU issued by Biden, that there's just a lot of it's creating the opportunity for a lot of chatter, I guess you would say. Like, I think
in some ways it's a less political process,
right?
Because in the EU you have member country, various representatives coming together, creating this political document, trying for the best, but really coming out, what's a massive and still very ambiguous thing. In the United States, you have, being appointed as a commissioner in FTC is definitely a political process. But folks who work at the office are there for 20, 30, 40 years and really can live with any politician and outlives them anytime, which is practically what happens. And folks who work there, in my experience, are very driven to protect consumers. And now they have this extra powers of SIDS. And so it's what I see the FTC adventure versus EU AI Act adventure is sort of A/B test for whether or not you need a democratic process to come up to regulate a technology, or I do think it's sort of much more democratically, politically done in the EU, whereas in the United States it's less sort of a political discussion. It's a very niche focus. Folks who are in the industry like you and I are following it. Most people don't. And you really sort of have this highly hyper-specialized agency dealing with it.
Well, and I think it creates a lot of hyper fatigue, honestly, because anyone that's supporting clients or any company that's dealing with the EU market and the US, you have to look and see what's going on in the EU. But in the US, you have FTC, but also SEC, but also, Department of, like, there's just so many little pieces, because even though we may not have a federal law that's close to being enacted, we have existing federal agencies, of course, like FTC, who are rolling out their own, regulations, oversight of the use of AI under their umbrella. And it just creates a lot of work for you to have to stay on top of everything that's going on out there.
Well, hence my argument that all of this has a really massive impact for smaller, highly innovative companies.
Right.
You as a one lawyer or one of five lawyers will have a lot of deep discussions and resistance and reading the statute together exercise, which is how you build sort of unity on the team and create strategy. So anything else you want to add about the mid-level risk, the big pregnant category that is likely here to stay and going to be dissected in many more ways?
No, I think it's very much like the rule against perpetuities. It's a wait and see rule.
Oh, wow, you really are good at selling it, Olga. It's just like that. Thank you. And on that bright note, thank you everyone for joining. We'll see you next time. Bye.
Bye.
And that brings us to the end of another thrilling episode on the Notes to My Legal Self AI Insights. We had a fantastic time exploring the fascinating intersection of law and AI with you. But hold on tight, because the adventure doesn't stop here. Stay connected with us on social media to continue the conversation, share your thoughts, and be part of our incredible community of legal enthusiasts. Together, we can inspire, learn, and make a real impact on the world of law and AI. If you enjoyed today's episode, we encourage you to share it with your friends, colleagues, and anyone else who could benefit from the exciting insights we discussed. Let's spread the knowledge and enthusiasm far and wide.